Catastrophe paves the way for evolution, especially after the major extinction event of the Devonian period. The Ammonite was deeply convinced of this. Approximately 370 million years ago, repeated catastrophic events severely impacted the already fragile ecosystem. The global ocean experienced possibly the most severe hypoxic event in history, and global cooling caused a significant drop in sea levels. These dual blows resulted in the extinction of 75% of marine species. However, the Ammonite emerged as a winner from this mass extinction. As an animal that needed to retreat into its shell and close the lid when encountering enemies, the Ammonite possessed a strong ability to resist hypoxia. Even the tiny Ammonite larvae would hide in hypoxic seawater to protect themselves. As a result, the Ammonite easily survived. And just like their ancestors, the Orthoceras, after the catastrophe ended, they quickly exploited their strong reproductive ability and took over the post-extinction ocean, becoming one of the most dominant swimming creatures of the new era. But life is never all smooth sailing. A group of vertebrates called chondrichthyes prevented the Ammonite from regaining its position as the top predator. However, this was not beyond expectation. Ammonites evolved from the slim Bactritoidea suborder. Even after tens of millions of years of evolution, during the Carboniferous period, most Ammonites were only about the size of a bowl. But the Ammonites believed it wasn't a problem. As long as their protective shell remained, there was always hope. From the Carboniferous to the Permian period, over 100 million years, the Ammonite took pride in its shell. Its shell never disappointed it. Even predators several orders of magnitude larger than the Ammonite, most of them did not want to break its shell by brute force. Only a few predators, such as the Helicoprion, would skillfully remove the Ammonite from its shell. Because environmental pressure was minimal, the Ammonite could safely and slowly refine its body. As a result, Ammonites occupied different ecological niches, evolved into distinct families of Ammonites, and they desired to compete with vertebrates for the position of top predator once again. The Ammonite believed that another mass extinction would be the key to its return to the top of the food chain. As time slowly passed, the Ammonite waited in the ocean for 110 million years. Finally, over 250 million years ago, it was as if the elder gods finally responded to the Ammonites' prayers. With a massive eruption from the Siberian supervolcano, the mass extinction finally arrived. However, this time, the elder gods seem to have lost control of the situation. This event, known as the Permian-Triassic extinction event, was the most horrific disaster since the birth of animals. The Earth's crust broke open, creating a gigantic wound visible from space, spewing billions of tons of mantle material, instantaneously turning Earth into a living hell. 96% of marine species went extinct. And in most sea areas, any organisms more complex than bacteria could not survive. It didn't end there. Minor ecological disasters continued to occur after the mass extinction, destroying Earth's few remaining refuges one by one. For example, the Prolecanididae survived the first wave of mass extinction, but then completely disappeared in the subsequent disasters. In the tens of millions of years that followed, another grim reaper, the Carnian pluvial event, was preparing to sweep across the Earth. The Ammonites' ancestor, the Bactritoidea suborder, most likely disappeared forever in the ocean during this long rainy season that lasted for 2 million years. However, it was as if the killing blade suddenly withdrew at the moment it touched the throat. One group of Ammonites miraculously survived the mass extinction. This was the Ceratidid, the descendants of the Prolecanididae we just mentioned. Although the Ceratidid survived, the diversity of the Ammonite was completely gone. According to the usual evolutionary story, this last surviving Ammonite could only stubbornly survive for a few more epochs, declaring its resilience to this unjust world. And then, the ending was still the inevitable extinction. However, in the early Triassic, fate seemed to be on the side of the Ammonites. After all, after this mass extinction, everything in the ocean was truly quiet. During this period, ceratidid Ammonites might have the illusion that they were the only survivors in the world. But soon, with its strong reproductive capacity, the ceratidid rapidly occupied the vacant ocean. In just a few million years, they evolved hundreds of new Ammonite species. The dream of returning to their ancestors' dominant position in the ocean seemed close at hand. Unfortunately, the Triassic was not the Ordovician. Suddenly, a group of unexpected enemies from an unforeseen path invaded the Ammonites' ocean. The Permian-Triassic extinction event not only heavily damaged the ocean but also left the land scarred. In this situation, land animals were also struggling for survival in starvation. They all noticed the abundant Ammonites in the ocean, so land animals flocked into the sea. In a short time, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and Cygnethoididae were swimming around in the ocean. Soon, marine reptiles learned how to crack the chambered shells of ammonites to eat the delicious ammonite flesh. If we look back at history, it's easy to find that before the Triassic, giant animals in the ocean were extremely rare. But from the Triassic period, animals weighing tons became commonplace. One hypothesis suggests that the nearly infinite supply of ammonites in the ocean from the Triassic nourished a considerable number of medium to large-sized animals, thereby creating a foundation for the emergence of gigantic animals. It wasn't just marine reptiles preying on them. The Ammonites soon discovered that there were many more creatures causing them trouble. Their armor was no longer reliable. All the Ammonites had left were two skills, swimming and reproduction. These two skills once ensured that the Ammonites could become the winners in the wasteland after the mass extinction. But obviously, there is no concept of patents in the animal kingdom. At least two types of animals used similar methods to grow. One was the ray-finned fishes, and the other was the cephalopods, the Ammonites' close relatives, also evolved from the Bactritoidea suborder, specifically the belemnites in the Triassic period. These animals had no shell like the Ammonites, so not only did they carry much less weight, but they were also more convenient for evolving their bodies into streamlined shapes. Therefore, they constituted a dimensional attack on the Ammonites in terms of swimming. They not only used their speed advantage to escape from marine reptiles, but they also hunted Ammonites with their speed advantage. Some ray-finned fishes, like the Durophagus fish, developed molar-like teeth that could grind the shells of Ammonite chambers. Cephalopods would directly grab the Ammonites with their tentacles, then use their radula to rub against the shell until they drilled a hole in the Ammonite shell and pulled out the soft body to eat. Even if life is on hard mode, Ammonites can handle it. After all, Ammonites are warriors who have returned from hell. In the 30 million years of the Triassic, the Ammonite populations faced extinction again and again, yet they also rapidly recovered again and again. They almost seized every opportunity to develop their groups as much as possible. At least in the resource-rich shallow sea areas, no matter how many disasters they faced, they never lost their dominant position as small swimming animals. The Ammonites thought, after all, I have lost everything before. What could be scarier than that? Of course, there is something, losing everything twice. About 200 million years ago, a supervolcano suddenly reappeared. The Earth's crust ruptured, creating a huge rift that spanned from the North Pole to the South Pole, known as the End-Triassic extinction. With a large amount of sulfur dioxide rushing into the atmosphere, the global temperature plummeted and the seawater receded quickly. This almost immediately wiped out the Ammonites, which mainly lived in the shallow sea. But it's unknown whether this was a blessing or a mockery by the ancient gods. The same miracle happened again with the Ammonites. We have to go back to the early Triassic, the most prosperous era of the Ammonite family. A group of Ammonites did not enjoy life in the rich shallow sea area but chose to go to the dark, poor deep sea to pioneer a new life. These rebellious Ammonites later evolved into a new group of the Ammonite family, known as Velociraptor. When the Ammonites were wiped out by the End-Triassic extinction, this group of Velociraptor, who had long been separated from the family, suddenly became the only remaining branch of the Ammonite family. At this time, the situation for the Ammonites was very critical. The Ceratidid Ammonites previously faced a nearly rebooted Earth after the Permian-Triassic extinction event, with almost no other animals in the ocean. But the End-Triassic extinction event was the weakest mass extinction event in history. The predators and competitors of the Ammonites during the Triassic not only didn't go extinct, but they even became stronger than before. The ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs completely shed their lizard-like body structure from the Triassic period and evolved into perfect marine creatures similar to fish. Their size and power also generally increased. The diversity of ray-finned fishes and cephalopods also increased significantly. Even some bigger ones seemed to have the ability to attack higher positions in the food chain. Not to mention that from the Jurassic period, sea crocodiles and sharks gradually took the stage. In the future Cretaceous period, there would be mosasaurs, crabs, etc. They would compress the living space of Ammonites in all directions. But the Velociraptor were prepared for this. They significantly strengthened their sutures to adapt to deep sea life and could ignore drastic changes in water pressure for rapid vertical ascents and descents. In addition, their shells were optimized to the almost lowest resistance shape that Ammonites could achieve, greatly enhancing their swimming ability. With these abilities, the Ammonite family started from scratch again. A branch of the Velociraptor family quickly returned to the shallow sea and transformed into shallow sea Ammonites in the shortest time. They later evolved into the narrowest group of Ammonites in the eyes of paleontologists, the order Ammonitida. Despite the rush into battle, despite being surrounded by strong enemies, the Ammonitida didn't let their ancestors down. They defeated all their enemies in a short time and reclaimed the kingdom of Ammonites from the Triassic era. Throughout nearly 50 million years of the Jurassic, Ammonites not only firmly maintained the same position as their ancestors, but they also brought the prosperity of Ammonites in shallow seas to a new height. Moreover, after two major extinctions, the Velociraptor deeply felt that the fate of the Ammonite family was full of calamities, and they had to prepare for the next major extinction. Velociraptor generally live in the deep sea more than 500 meters deep. The temperature and acidity here rarely change drastically, and the rise and fall of sea level are difficult to reach this depth. But a group of Ammonites still didn't feel safe enough. They tried to explore deeper and colder sea areas, and this group of Ammonites that explored towards the abyss evolved into Lithoceratiina. Since the Velociraptor have basically evolved their sutures to the extreme, strengthening the sutures cannot improve the pressure resistance anymore. Therefore, the Lithoceratiina changed their approach and set up a large number of reinforcing ribs on their shells, which finally enabled them to break through the depth of 700 meters. At this time, Lithoceratiina might think, "I have done my best, I hope that cruel ancient god has a bit of mercy." About 183 million years ago, perhaps due to volcanic activity, the global ocean suddenly suffered a serious pollution, known as the torsion extinction event. In theory, such a low-intensity extinction event should not pose a threat to highly adaptive organisms like Ammonites. However, unexpectedly, Ammonites became one of the most heavily lost groups in this extinction event. At this point, the Ammonites finally understood that the so-called Golden Age of Ammonites was just a sweet dream. The large number and rich species of Ammonites cannot conceal the fact that their survival strategy is single. Faced with a generation of predators in the ocean stronger than the previous one, whether Ammonites add reinforcing ribs and spines to their shells or optimize the mineral composition of their shells, everything gradually comes to an end. The Ammonites have evolved to the extreme. Finally, at the end of the Jurassic about 145 million years ago, the rising new enemies broke through the last line of defense of the Ammonites. They couldn't even maintain their false prosperity. However, even in the most desperate end, the Ammonites still didn't give up. In the Cretaceous, the Ammonites made their last dying struggle. They couldn't balance swimming and armor, so they developed separately. In terms of swimming, Ammonites noticed a problem long ago. That is, for armored swimming animals like them that rely on jet propulsion, there is a fundamental flaw in their body structure. That is, the power axis does not coincide with the direction of movement. Simply put, some of their jet propulsion power is used to propel themselves to move, but some are wasted in making themselves rotate. You can understand this by watching the swaying swimming posture of the Nautilus today. So, in order to solve this problem, some Ammonites may simply give up some of the protection of their shells and stretch their bodies a long distance out of the shell to force the power to coincide with the movement. However, the fact proves that doing so is somewhat counterproductive. No matter how much Ammonites make their swimming more proficient, they cannot turn themselves into the minimum resistance streamline like fish and octopuses. Moreover, their shells are not only purely cumbersome but also prone to attach many organisms such as barnacles and oysters to further increase resistance. If developing swimming isn't working, what about strengthening the shell? To support a thicker shell, some Ammonites started to grow larger. Since the beginning of the Jurassic, the diameter of the Ammonite shell has exceeded half a meter. One kind of Parapuzosia sepenridensis that lived about 80 million years ago in the late Cretaceous, its unearthed fossil diameter reached a staggering 1.8 meters. What this implies is probably not difficult to think of for friends who have seen the video of the Anomalocaris. The increase in size means that they have no way out. Out of desperation, some Ammonites simply took the path of becoming strange and evolved into all kinds of strange shapes, trying to get a chance to survive from various marginal niches. Although these strangely shaped alien Ammonites are not uncommon in history, they are not as complete as the Ancyloceratina that went completely crazy in the Cretaceous. Some of them took the retro route, like the Baculites, which reformed themselves into a straight line, just like the body structure of Bactritoidea. There are also pseudocryoceras, which look a bit like the eubronts mentioned in the previous video. If it weren't for their sutures revealing their true identity, it would be difficult to distinguish whether they are Ammonites or not. There are many other strange-shaped Ammonites. They fight against the elder gods' tricks with their last madness, but all this is meaningless in front of fate. About 90 million years ago, a global extinction event occurred, which we will talk about later, the Cenomanian-Turonian extinction event that wiped out the ichthyosaurs. This extinction event is of special significance to Ammonites because it was essentially a wave of massive global marine hypoxia. For Ammonites that can tolerate hypoxia, this should have been an advantage. However, this time, the Ammonites not only suffered heavy losses but also failed to revive their species. Their once territories quickly fell into the hands of their new opponents, the teleosts, which are the fish in the modern sense. This time, Ammonites were defeated directly on their own advantageous battlefield. The Ammonites failed. This catastrophic defeat thoroughly pronounced the death sentence of Ammonites and all armored swimming creatures. No matter how many times the Ammonites flourished afterwards, they no longer held any hope for the future. The large meteorite that hit the Gulf of Mexico simply sent this desperate group on their last journey. This time, there were no ceratidid Ammonites or Velociraptida Ammonites to extend the fate of the Ammonites. And they probably didn't want to struggle anymore. And so, the tragic evolutionary story of the Ammonites comes to an end.